Now, fuel distribution, health, banking, and other essential services nationwide will be shut down from today as the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC, and of course the Trade Union Congress, TUC, begins its indefinite strike over minimum wage and the recent hike in the electricity tariff. This follows yesterday's failed intervention by the National Assembly to convince organized labor otherwise.
NLC and TUC leaders had on Workers' Day celebration, giving the federal government May 31st as its deadline to conclude negotiations on a new national minimum wage or risk nationwide industrial unrest. The tripartite committee came to the negotiation table for the third time on Friday, the 31st of May, but again, Labour walked away as the government did not make a new offer beyond 60,000 naira against Labour's 494,000 naira.
We would have been much more happier if this evening that the issues of we have a great understanding that by tomorrow morning we will sign off issues bordering on the minimum wage. Because before as at the last meeting, we were very, very close to signing off. I mean, close in the sense that if the figures were right, it's just to prepare a report and sign. So it's not something that is that lengthy anymore. But we have listened to them. We would take all their plea to our organs, and we would have an organs meeting taking what they have promised and the pleas that they have made to our organs. For now, we don't have the powers to call off the industrial action, so the industrial action will continue while we would have a conversation with our respective organs as soon as possible to lay bare what they have put forward and what they have proposed.
Meanwhile, the federal government, in a swift reaction yesterday, warned both unions to shelve the proposed indefinite strike, saying it was premature and illegal. Joining us to discuss this is Ireoluwa Oguntuashe, law expert, labor law expert. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I would like to find out what your thoughts are on the negotiation process and organized labor's demands. Do you think, like some think, is unrealistic and that the government cannot pay it? Or do you think that the government has the necessary capacity to pay for this, but it's probably just been difficult?
Okay, thanks for having me. When you talk about something, whether it is realistic or unrealistic, there are a range of factors that we're going to look at. And let's consider the last time, 2019, that we had the last minimum wage. Look at the rate of inflation, look at the amount in which you assess health, in hospital. Look at the price in which you buy food, and now compare it to this period 5 years after. You realize that, the situation is not the same. It has really skyrocketed. Probably that's the reason Labour is projecting that amount. But I should also say that Labour needs to watch it. They need to be very careful, because projecting an amount of 494,000, that is the last proposal that they've come to. 494,000, in my opinion, appears too high. And why am I saying this? Now, we know that, like you rightly said, a tripartite committee was constituted, and this tripartite committee does not involve the federal government alone. I think Labour should not look at this thing from the angle or from the prism of federal government paying minimum wage. Organized private sector would also pay minimum wage, because the Minimum Wage Act would apply, across board to the federal government employees, state government employees, and organized labor sector. So this being so, I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is that how much can the organized private sector go, in consenting to this proposal of Labour? How much can the respective state government also go in consenting to the proposal of Labour? Because when the minimum wage was even 30,000, we cannot be referring to the Minimum Wage Act of 2019 as the extant minimum wage again. It should have been amended. So when the minimum wage was 30,000, there are some state government that are even struggling with it. I wouldn't want to delve into the reason it may have been difficult or practically challenging for them to pay as low as 30,000. But the existential reality is that they're still struggling to pay the minimum wage of 30,000. So given this fact, if Labour is now proposing a minimum wage of 494,000, is on that premise I'm looking at the realistic nature. It is okay for people to canvass argument of leakages. It is okay for people to canvass argument of corruption. It is okay for people to canvass argument of financial misappropriation. But one thing that is very important is also that the law forbids the doing of something that is impossible. And that's why the litmus question comes. Is it possible for the organized private sector and for the state government to pay 494,000? That is why we should be looking at this thing. Yeah. Because even if federal government agrees with Labour, I believe the organized private sector will suffer. And I believe that this thing will generate more litigation in courts. While I favor the fact that minimum wage should be increased and should be more than the 60,000, I also think that Labour also needs to come down, such that it will be seen as the amount they will agree on may not necessarily be living wage, but may be close to the amount of the living wage.
All right. So also quickly speak on the legality of the strike, because the government says it's illegal and, premature. So speak about, the legality of going on a strike now by Labour and TUC. And then also, they had deliberations yesterday evening that amounted to, nothing. What do you think are some of the things that should be spoken about when they have these deliberations between the National Assembly, or rather between the Nigerian government and Labour? What are some of the, details that must be brought out, and of course be deliberated upon? What can the government also, say to Labour that may, make them call off the strike?
Okay, the question you've asked is like three questions in one, so I'll pick it one after the other. Now, you ask about the legality of the strike based on what the Attorney General of the Federation had said. Now, I think there are 2 or 3 grounds. The number one, that the basis upon which the AG Fed has said that the strike is illegal is number one, on the premise of Section 41 and Section 42 of the Trade Dispute Act. Now, Section 41 of the Trade Dispute Act talks about preventing a worker from going on strike if the worker is within essential service. Now, if I talk about this, the question I'm going to ask is that all the employees in the organized labor sector that are on strike, are they conceptualized under the Trade Dispute Act to be performing essential services? Because the first schedule of the Trade Dispute Act also tried to bring out, the categories of workers that are under essential services: CBN employees, employees of Nigerian Security Printing and Minting Company Limited, employees of the bank, doctors and nurses, employees that are involved in electricity supply, and 2 or 3 other categories of employees. In my mind, I think that the totality of employees that have gone on strike now, in accordance with what, in accordance or to support the Nigerian Labour Congress, they are not totally classified as employees that are in the essential labor sector or that are performing essential services. So on that premise, I would think that the opinion or the correspondence brought out, by the AGF on the premise of Section 41, to me, does not mean that they cannot go on strike, does not mean that the strike is illegal. Now, come to think of it, strike in its sense, like I've said before, is a constitutional right, that is guaranteed pursuant to Chapter 4, Section 39 of the 1999 Constitution. And the Trade Dispute Act also provides for a provision for strikes. So I don't think that the strike is illegal, in my own opinion. And come to think of it also, before the Nigerian Labour Congress, NLC, decides to go on strike, and TUC, they had already given out a notice, sufficient notice, to the Nigerian government that if we don't settle this thing by the 31st of May, we may need to commence industrial action. So I think that notice is sufficient enough, because the Section 41 and Section 42 talks about notice, 15 days notice. Now, can we say that notice has not been given? In my opinion, it is subjective. The notice has been given. And again, I don't think that the Attorney General of the Federation is the court, is the adjudicatory body that can rightly say, with all due respect, that the strike, the present strike now is illegal. And why am I saying this? Now, Section 6 of the 1999 Constitution, as amended, vested adjudicatory powers on the judiciary. Section 287 of the 1999 Constitution, as amended, now says that any order that is given by the court must be obeyed. So the question again is whether an order has been given by the courts pursuant to Section 287 of the 1999 Constitution stating that the strike is illegal. As at this present moment, I don't think there is no order. So it's on that premise that I think that the strike is illegal. Now, on what the federal government can do, in the process of negotiating with labor is very simple. I think the issue, the existential reality has always been that there is no mutual trust between labor and the federal government. And also, by extension, I'm seeing less trust now between the Nigerian employees and labor. And this is because, every time labor comes out to say that they are going on strike, people usually feel that at one point or the other, they may have compromised their position. I think labor needs to work on that. Let people invest so much trust in them.
Okay, so now looking at this particular situation, do you foresee,
yes.
How do you think this strike is going to turn out? Do you think it's one of the ones that Nigerian employees would see as one that might be compromised before it even gets started? That's one. And what would you say the impact of this strike is on Nigeria's economy?
Whether I like it or not, there is much pressure on the Nigerian Labour Congress to call off the strike. I'm not even talking of NLC compromising their position now, but due to the pressure, because they would also be looking at things from every perspective. And the implication is not far-fetched. It's very simple. It's going to have far-reaching implication on our economy. People will not go to work. Nigeria will lose money. We're still trying to build up our revenue base, and Nigeria will lose money. And also, the people that are supposed to be productive will not be productive. Artisans on the street will feel it. People on the street will feel it. The streets will be dry. And we should also consider the fact that, our economy is gradually tilting towards the doldrums. So for me, I've never been an advocate of strike because of the economic implication, although the provision for strike is constitutional. But I've always been an advocate of picketing, which unfortunately the Nigerian Labour Congress is not doing in this circumstance.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you mentioned, there's a trust deficit between NLC and the government, same with the trust deficit between the Nigerian people and the Nigerian workers and the NLC. But, I still want you to speak a little bit more on what the federal government, can say to convince labor to call off their strike. Are they going to, say 65,000 now, or maybe 70,000? I mean, should they continue to add more to the 60,000 to maybe convince labor? Or is there other things that might be, well enough? Are there incentives that they maybe would offer? You remember when the fuel subsidy statement was made by the president, he then offered some, what they call them now? Buses, the CNG buses, transportation, offered, some cash supply across the country to ease. So are those some of the things that the government maybe should offer to labor, to make them call off the strike?
Yes, I agree with you. Those are some of the things the federal government can offer to labor. But in addition to that, I would also suggest that in addition to the increase in the minimum wage that should happen, federal government should not remove the 35,000 wage demands. That would also serve as a cushion on the side. Don't forget that the policy came up in September, and I think it was a 6-month policy. And as at present, I think the policy has ended. So I think that policy should be reintroduced. The 35,000 wage demand, wage policy should be introduced. That's on one hand. On the other hand, federal government should also be sincere enough with Nigerians to come up with practical solutions of increasing this minimum wage. And when I say practical solutions, what do I mean? 60,000 is not practical. A bag of rice is 80,000 naira. For a family of 4, for a family of 5, 60,000 is definitely not practical. That is number 2. So they need to, the argument of saying that they increase it by 100% by adding 30,000 to it in addition to the previous 30,000, to me, is not logical. If I'm looking at a practical solution, why can't they propose a sum of, let's say, 120,000? If they propose a sum of 120,000, in as much as I believe that that amount may still not be enough, but at least it's something that negotiation, practical negotiation, can be premised on. And it will be a substantial shift, from their 60,000 to this current anticipated proposal or proposed proposal of 120,000.